Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Dario Fo's play Mistero Buffo, which can be roughly translated as the comic mysteries, maybe slightly more literally as the buffoonish mysteries. So basically what this play is a set of modernized versions of the medieval comic mysteries. So in the medieval period, there were the standard mystery plays, which were like church approved and things like this. These survive in, for instance, the York mystery plays or the Wakefield cycle, things like this, which survive from England. But then there were also the comic mysteries, which were an unauthorized set of performances. They were much more in line with what Mikhail Bakhtin called the Carnivalesque, which was an anti-authoritarian, lowbrow humor, very earthy type of entertainment. So sex jokes, fart jokes, eating, these very sort of visceral things played a big part in the Carnivalesque, along with the mockery of aristocrats, nobles, law enforcement, sheriffs, and things like this, and church figures. Now, these were anti-authoritarian. They also tended to be quite egalitarian. And at the time that he wrote and performed Mistero Buffo, Fo was a member of the Communist Party in Italy. He later actually broke with the Communist Party because they weren't strident and left-wing enough for him. So he was very much dedicated to egalitarianism, to anti-establishment politics, etc., etc. And Mistero Buffo definitely reflects that. Part of the way in which it reflects these politics very directly is through this Brechtian framing technique. So Bertolt Brecht, one of the things that he argues is that in the epic theater, people should be directly confronted with the ways in which the subject matter being portrayed is relevant to their lives. And Fo does this very, very directly. So right from the beginning, I'm gonna read you the opening portion, because essentially what we've got here is between these short medieval plays being modernized, we have essentially a lecture by the actor about what's going on, why it's important, etc., etc. So he starts here. The term mystery was already in use by the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. It means a play, a religious representation, a performance. We still hear the term used nowadays during the Mass when the priest says, in the first glorious mystery, in the second mystery, etc. The word mystery means a religious performance. Comic mystery, on the other hand, means a grotesque performance. The comic mysteries were invented by the people. As far back as the 2nd and 3rd centuries after Christ, people used to entertain themselves, and this was not merely a form of entertainment, by playing, performing dramas in a form which was both grotesque and laden with irony. The reason for this was that, for the people, the theater, and especially grotesque theater, has always been a primary means of expression, of communication, and also a vehicle for the development and spreading of ideas. The theater was the spoken and dramatized newspaper of the people of that time. The jongleur, jongleur here is a word chosen by the translator. It's a French word, replacing gigliare in Italian. Not really sure why the translator chose to replace an Italian word with a French word in translating an Italian play, but there we are. The jongleur used to turn up in the streets of the town and reveal to the people their own condition, that of being beaten as well as taken for a ride. So that's really an important line, because that's the whole idea behind Brechtian epic theater, is that through drama you reveal to the people their own condition. That's a great explanation of what Brecht tries to do, and what Fo does in this Brechtian play. Because the law prescribed beatings as well as hangings, there were plenty of other examples of vicious laws like this. Anyway, the jongleur was a figure who, in the Middle Ages, was part of the people. As Muratori says, the jongleur was born from the people, and from the people he took their anger in order to be able to give it back to them, mediated via the grotesque, through reason, in order that the people should gain greater awareness of their own condition. Again, that's a great explanation of Brechtian ethos. And it is for this reason that in the Middle Ages, jongleurs were killed with such abandon. They flayed them alive, they cut out their tongues, not to mention other niceties of the time. So again, we start with this very direct lecture, and it actually includes slides. Like these pictures that are reprinted in this version, and there's a good number of them. These were part of the performance itself. So as the actor talked, as he gave this lecture, preceding or following the plays, he would show these slides, and what the slides dramatize is medieval performances or Carnivalesque celebrations and things like this. And all of this, again, is in service of reflecting to the people their own condition, the way in which, and you separate it historically, and this is, again, one of the Brechtian things. You set a performance in a historical period with the intention that people in the audience today can say, aha, in that situation, I would do X. And then they start to think, how much is my situation, my socio-cultural context, like that being depicted on stage? Social awakening. Haha. And Brecht is funny, but Brecht is not a comedian. Brecht is not a comic playwright in the way that Fo is. And so that's one of the really interesting differences. And Fo is explicit about this being comic satire. He actually says at one point, still in the first very lengthy lecture before the first of these short plays, speaking of the people, we should remember what Mao Zedong says about satire. He says that satire is the most powerful weapon that the people have ever had in order to make clear to themselves within their own culture all the misdeeds and corruption of their rulers. I think that's a great line. I have no idea where Mao actually said that. I have read Mao's Red Book and done a video on that. I don't see that in Mao's Red Book, so I don't know if Fo has a different source for that, but I've been unable to track that down. So I just attribute that to Fo. But again, he is a communist at this point, and so quoting from Mao is perfectly logical for what he's doing. The particular form of this satire, again, is this anti-authoritarian satire going after religious leaders, going after secular leaders, but because the mysteries are religious plays, a lot of it is critical of religious leaders, bishops, even the Pope, etc., etc. Sometimes even going further and critiquing God. So in The Slaughter of the Innocents, which is one of the pieces in this collection, Mistero Buffo, there's a woman who's driven mad when her baby is killed, and so she swaddles a lamb and goes around telling everyone that that is her baby. And she has this diatribe against God, this critique of God. She's talking to the Virgin Mary, who's played by an automaton, basically, a sort of statue that is articulated with joints and can be moved sort of like a puppet. And this woman says, let me find it here. Yeah. She says to the Virgin Mary, I love this little, talking about her baby, which is actually a lamb. Her real baby has been killed, and she's chosen this lamb. She's identified this lamb as her baby to deal with that trauma. She says, I love this little creature so much that if they were to take him away from me, I would go crazy. When I think of the terrible fright I had this morning when I went to the cradle and found it empty, full of blood, and my baby nowhere in sight. Luckily, though, it wasn't true. It was only a dream. I knew it was a dream because a little later I woke up, and I was still under the influence of the dream, and I was so desperate that I almost went out of my mind. I went out into the courtyard, and I began to curse God. God, in your heart, awesome in your heartlessness, I shouted. You ordered this slaughter. You wanted this sacrifice in exchange for sending down your son. 1,000 babies killed for the sake of one of yours. A river of blood for a cup. You should have kept him with you, this son of yours, if he was going to cost us poor souls such a mighty sacrifice. But in the end you too will see what it means to die of heartbreak. The day when your own son dies. In the end you too will understand what a mighty and awesome affliction you visited on mankind for all eternity. No father on earth, no matter how wicked, would ever have had the heartlessness to impose such a thing on his own son. And this is actually based on actual comic mysteries from the medieval period. Like, Fo is not necessarily making this up out of nothing, but, this is some hardcore stuff for a society that is almost universally Christian. Yeah, there's some Jews around in medieval Europe, but the overwhelming majority of the population is Christian. This is, some hardcore stuff. Now, it does turn out that the woman then sees this lamb, identifies that as her baby, and apologizes to God, but still, just the expression of that is subversive in itself. And what the actor says in the lecture preceding this is, and why should the people feel such a deep-seated hatred toward the Eternal Father? We've already seen why, because the Eternal Father represents the impositions which rulers have forced upon the people. It is he who introduced divisions among the people, who gave land, power, and privilege to certain groups of people, and handed out suffering, desperation, subjection, humiliation, and mortification to the rest. This is why God is hated, because he represents the rulers. It is he who hands out thrones and privileges. On the other hand, Jesus Christ is loved because it is he who came to earth seeking to give people back their spring. Above all else, he represents dignity, and in these folk traditions, the question of dignity is raised over and over again with an incredible persistence. Dignity. So we've got that explanation. Again, this is a Brechtian thing, explaining to the audience, here's what this means, here's what this performance signifies. That's very, very Brechtian. But then the last bit of the preface of Slaughter of the Innocents is equally Brechtian because it explains what you're about to see in order to make the action comprehensible. So the last bit here is, the piece is performed by only one player, and afterwards I shall explain why. This is not to do with exhibitionism. It has an important underlying rationale. There will also be a moving statue on stage, as I explained, as well as the chorus of flagellants which opens the piece. At a certain point, as you will see, a soldier is killed on stage, and the flagellants chorus sing a funeral dirge. So again, all of this is about helping the audience see what's going on and why that reflects on the situation that they are still in. Speaking of the situation that they are still in, there's a bit fairly early on in the opening lecture that's very interesting. It does a couple of different pieces of work. I'll read it to you. It says, we've discovered that in the Middle Ages, police stations were all built on the one floor only. This was in order to guard against dipsomania, a disease which has been known to strike, in particular, policemen and officers of the law. It's a curious disease, whereby during interrogation sessions they sometimes make mistakes in giving directions. Confusion sets in, and they begin to mistake their left for their right. They say, "You're free to go now, there's the door," and they point to the window. This has happened several times, but only in the Middle Ages, of course. Now that's a striking joke to make, because actually, so this is a reference, so according to the footnote here, this is a reference to the death of the anarchist Pinelli, who fell from a window while being interrogated by the Milan police, the story that inspired Accidental Death of an Anarchist, which is probably one of Fo's most famous plays. So Fo, and I think actually was written a couple of years after Mistero Buffo. So this is Fo making reference to a contemporary political event in which an anarchist was murdered by the police, and also making reference to a play that he is going to write in the future. Probably is already thinking about it at this point, but I don't know enough about Fo's timeline to be sure of that. So basically, this is the kind of thing that we see over and over and over throughout Mistero Buffo, is this brutal satirical critique of the power systems of the time, combined with this very clear awareness of how you perform in order to wake people's social consciousness, in order to get people to ask questions about how much better society is now than the bad old days being dramatized on stage.